Few knew what was truly happening in the corridors of Nazi film studios or at the private dinners of Third Reich ministers. But for Lída Baarová, it was nothing out of the ordinary. It was part of her everyday life. In an era when cinema had become the most powerful tool of Nazi propaganda, the Czech actress Lída Baarová achieved international fame and became the mistress of Joseph Goebbels. According to her, Goebbels not only decided what was filmed, but also used cinema to deceive Hitler himself, shaping reality to suit his own interests. What began as a story of success turned into a scandal that forced Hitler's intervention and ended with Lída's expulsion from Germany, initiating an unstoppable fall. From an international star to a cursed figure in European cinema, condemned to isolation, censorship and oblivion for years. This documentary reconstructs her story, that of the woman who captivated the architect of Nazi propaganda, and the truth only she could reveal. Hollywood Nazi style, the UFA cinematic empire in Berlin. Before her life became forever tied to one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century, Lída Baarová was known across Europe as a rising star. Elegant, talented and with a magnetic presence, she first conquered Czech cinema and then German cinema, where her face became synonymous with glamour. She was born in Prague in 1914 into a middle-class family. From a young age, she showed talent for the performing arts and music. Her family encouraged her to study at the Prague Conservatory, where she trained as an actress. There, she learned the basics of acting and began participating in small theatrical productions. At 17, she sought a place in Czech cinema and landed a minor role in a local production. That brief appearance opened the door to the national film industry, where she gradually began to be recognized for her on-screen presence. It was then that the first decisive turn in her career came. Czech director Otakar Vávra invited her to a casting for a locally produced film. She arrived with confidence, pretending to have more experience than she actually had. During the screen test, she demonstrated naturalness and a visual appeal that impressed the team. Otakar Vávra was convinced he had a new figure to exploit on the big screen. Thus, she secured her first serious contract with a local studio. The production was a success, and her face began to be recognized in her country. Before turning 20, she had already appeared in several films, making her one of the most promising young actresses of the time. As her career progressed, the atmosphere in Europe began to change. In Germany, Adolf Hitler had come to power in 1933, and the Nazi regime sought to control all cultural spheres. Joseph Goebbels, as the Minister of Propaganda, became the man who decided what was filmed and what was not. Cinema became a tool of influence, and Goebbels bet on the UFA studio, located in Berlin, as the heart of the German film industry. UFA produced both entertainment films and propaganda pieces, combining Hollywood aesthetics with messages that reinforced the regime's power. It was in this context that Lída received a proposal that would change her life. Through industry contacts, her name reached the ears of German producers. A telegram from UFA arrived in Prague, inviting her to Berlin for a screen test. The actress accepted without hesitation, seeing it as an opportunity for an international leap. She traveled with her mother, leaving behind her familiar world. Upon arriving in Berlin, she was struck by the scale of the Babelsberg Studios, the largest production center in Europe. There, she underwent a screen test in which she had to show expressiveness without speaking much. The executives were impressed and offered her an initial contract. During her first days in Berlin, Lída met actor Gustav Fröhlich, famous for his role in Metropolis. UFA wanted to turn them into a cinematic couple, capitalizing on their charisma. The chemistry between them was immediate, both on and off the screen. Together, they filmed several movies that received a good response from the German public. One of the most significant shoots took place in Venice, with a production blending romance and drama. The premiere of that film drew the attention of Nazi regime figures, including Joseph Goebbels. At the premiere, Adolf Hitler was present in the audience. Lída later recalled that Hitler barely spoke to her, offering only a courteous gesture. Goebbels, on the other hand, observed her closely. No relationship existed between them yet, but that encounter marked the beginning of an interest that would grow over time. Cinema in Berlin was under Goebbels' direct scrutiny, as he not only approved scripts and actors but also decided who could rise and who had to disappear from the screen. While Lída worked on new productions, she witnessed the transformation of the German film industry. Goebbels promoted films that appeared to be comedies or romantic dramas but contained hidden messages that supported the regime's vision. Actresses were required to maintain an impeccable image and, in many cases, were used as propaganda figures to present a glamorous face of Nazi Germany to the world. Lída, with her Czech beauty and natural talent, became a favorite of the public, though she could not yet imagine the price she would pay for that fame. Her schedule in Berlin filled with shoots, premieres, and social events. The parties organized by UFA were lavish, with spectacular decorations and the presence of high-ranking Nazi officials. It was at these events that Goebbels began to show a closer interest in the film stars. Despite his short stature, limp, and distinctive voice, the minister knew how to compensate for his physical shortcomings with captivating charisma and skillful conversation. He observed each actor and actress with a critical eye, deciding who fit the image of the Reich. Lída's mother accompanied her everywhere, trying to shield her from the political atmosphere surrounding the industry. However, the young actress was beginning to enjoy life in Berlin. The Babelsberg studios offered advanced technology, enormous sets, and production teams that surpassed the quality of anything she had seen in Prague. Working there was like being at the heart of an unstoppable machine. New scenes were filmed every day, with a pace that left little room for rest. The demands were high, but so were the rewards. Her name was starting to be known beyond Czech borders. In those early months, Lída had no direct contact with the regime. Her interactions were with UFA producers and directors who saw her as a safe bet. However, it was impossible to ignore the presence of Nazism in every corner. Swastika flags adorned the streets, and speeches by Hitler and Goebbels were broadcast on the radio almost daily. Despite this, the atmosphere in the studios was dynamic and focused on spectacle. Shoots were planned with precision, and the German public continued flocking to cinemas to escape political reality. Lída's first contract with UFA allowed her to star in several films in a short period. Critics described her as an actress with a doll-like face and great expressiveness on camera. Her image appeared in film magazines and promotional posters, solidifying her popularity. Berlin welcomed her as a rising star, and she began to understand the power of the German film industry. Despite political restrictions, cinema offered an illusion of creative freedom that many artists sought to maintain. In parallel, Goebbels tightened his control over UFA. According to Longerich's book, the minister not only oversaw projects, but dictated what messages could be conveyed in each production. His obsession with image led him to intervene in details like costumes, makeup, and even the tone of the stories. For him, cinema had to be both appealing and useful to the regime. The stars, meanwhile, were treated as valuable pieces of a propaganda machine. In this context, Lída continued filming, unaware that her life would soon change. Each day at Babelsberg brought her closer to the circle of power. The atmosphere in Berlin was vibrant, but also tense. The streets were filled with posters, parades, and displays of Nazi party strength. Though cinema aimed to distract the public, everything was steeped in politics. Lída was beginning to navigate a terrain where fame and propaganda blended without boundaries. The premiere of the film in Venice marked a turning point in her career. It was the first time she shared space with the regime's most powerful figures. There, Hitler and Goebbels saw her as a rising star. She did not yet know that this encounter was the prelude to a story that would haunt her for the rest of her life. At that moment, she was focused only on her work, the new roles coming her way, and establishing her name in European cinema. Her life in Berlin became a routine of shoots, meetings, and parties. Each film was a step closer to the top, but also a step closer to Goebbels' circle. Without realizing it, the actress was beginning to catch the attention of a man who combined political power with a fascination for film stars. What had so far been a promising career was about to intertwine with Europe's most dangerous propaganda machine. Bogency, the intimate setting where everything began to unravel. Lída Baarová was already a recognized actress in Berlin when Joseph Goebbels began to approach her. Though their initial encounters had been formal and within public contexts, they soon took on a more personal tone. Goebbels, as the Minister of Propaganda, had absolute control over the film industry and knew how to use his position to influence not only projects, but also people. One of the key events was a party at Fraueninsel, organized by Goebbels himself. The evening brought together figures from film, the press, and politics. Lída attended accompanied by her mother and Gustav Fröhlich, her partner at the time. During the night, the minister became more approachable, asking about her recent work and praising her achievements. His wife, Magda Goebbels, observed her with distant courtesy, as if already sensing something beyond professional admiration. Goebbels began inviting her frequently to meetings under the pretext of discussing future projects. On one such occasion, he organized a yacht outing with several artists, including Lída and Gustav. On board, he sought moments alone with her and showered her with public compliments. Though Lída kept her distance, it was clear that the minister's interest went beyond cinema. According to Peter Longerich, Goebbels' diaries reveal how his fascination with the Czech actress intensified from 1936. He mentioned her films with admiration and noted details about her performances and presence. At an event in Nuremberg, he organized a private screening with her as the guest of honor, using the occasion to introduce her to high-ranking regime officials, thus reinforcing their closeness under a veneer of formality. The minister's interest did not go unnoticed. Rumors began circulating on film sets, and his persistence caused discomfort. Though Lída tried to focus on her work, the pressure grew. Gustav, increasingly uneasy, saw how the situation strained their relationship. Despite Goebbels attending these events with his wife, his attention increasingly centered on Lída, and Magda began to notice. At UFA, power and entertainment were closely intertwined. Goebbels used social events not only as a showcase for Nazi glamour, but also as a stage to exert influence. Through small gestures, calculated compliments, or seemingly innocent conversations, he marked his territory. Soon after, an invitation to an evening at his Schwanenwerder residence marked a new turning point. Though not an intimate encounter, it was clear to everyone that the minister's interest was becoming more evident. That night, he again publicly praised her work and showed that he followed her career with special attention. From then on, his approaches became more frequent, and the relationship began to take a course from which there was no turning back. The first signs of this transformation became even more visible when Goebbels invited her to his weekend retreat in Bodensee. Unlike Berlin's events, that place offered a more relaxed and intimate atmosphere, a house surrounded by forests, with a quiet lake contrasting with the capital's bustle. There, the minister hosted evenings blending politics, music and culture, surrounded by artists and regime figures. Lída, increasingly present in these circles, was treated as a guest of honor. Goebbels sought moments to speak with her alone, and among the attendees, whispers began that his admiration for the Czech actress went beyond the professional. During one of those weekends, their conversation turned more personal. Goebbels, with his deep voice and measured gestures, spoke to her about the importance of cinema to the regime and how actresses were a key part of the image they wanted to project to the world. Lída listened cautiously, maintaining eye contact while he seized every pause to highlight her talent. That night, Goebbels sat at the piano and played a few pieces, a habit of his to impress guests. Lída felt growing unease, but also understood she was facing a man with a dangerous mix of power and charm. The situation grew tenser as the invitations became more frequent. Goebbels not only sought her at parties or premieres, but also organized more intimate meetings under the guise of discussing future film projects. Lída found it difficult to decline these invitations. She knew that a misstep could have consequences for her career at UFA, a studio entirely controlled by the propaganda ministry. Each visit to Bodensee or Schwanenwerder put her in a more delicate position. Gustav Fröhlich, her real-life partner, began to notice the change. At first, he tried to ignore the rumors, convinced it was merely professional interest, but tensions arose when Lída spent hours in meetings with the minister or returned late from Nazi-hosted parties. Gustav, though a respected figure in German cinema, lacked the power to confront Goebbels directly. His frustration surfaced in tense comments during shoots, affecting their on-screen relationship as well. Goebbels, meanwhile, seemed determined not to hide his interest. According to Peter Longerich's analysis, he wrote in his diary about a miracle after meeting Lída at the Nuremberg rally. Those words reflected the impact the actress had on him. His entries grew more personal, mentioning the light and charm he saw in her. Lída was unaware of these writings, but felt his growing insistence in every gesture and glance. UFA's parties became stages where the tension was palpable. Directors and actors noticed how Goebbels followed her with his gaze in every room. Magda Goebbels, his wife, also began to notice her husband's interest. Though accustomed to rumors about the minister's private life, this time was different. Lída was too visible, a rising star drawing everyone's attention. The first tensions in the Goebbels household began with private arguments. According to witnesses, Magda did not hide her displeasure when she saw Lída at parties or ministry gatherings. The minister, far from holding back, sought ways to get closer. He organized a boat trip with a select group of guests, including Lída and Gustav. During that outing, Goebbels found moments to speak with her alone, praising her work in cinema and discussing his vision for the future of German films. Gustav noticed Lída's discomfort, but could not prevent the minister from maintaining that particular attention. Every word from Goebbels was calculated to seduce her with a mix of flattery and professional promises. The minister's inner circle began to whisper about the matter. Some of his ministry collaborators knew that Goebbels could become obsessed with the female figures he admired. In Lída's case, his interest was evident. Meetings with the UFA team began to revolve around projects in which she was the protagonist, as if the minister was seeking to ensure her presence in every major production. Rumors reached the corridors of the studio, where technicians and actors commented that the doctor had a new muse. Lída felt the weight of the situation. She did not want to compromise her career or her image, but she was also aware that a direct refusal could cost her place in German cinema. She tried to keep conversations with Goebbels on professional ground, discussing scenes, shoots, and filming plans. However, the minister's questions began to turn more personal. He wanted to know details about her life in Berlin, her relationship with Gustav, and her aspirations beyond cinema. Magda, increasingly uneasy, made direct comments about her husband's behavior. In private meetings, she warned him that his closeness to Lída could turn into a scandal. Goebbels ignored these warnings, convinced he could control the situation. Arguments at the Schwanenwerder villa became frequent, and some aides overheard shouts coming from the rooms when the topic arose. Despite this tension, the relationship between Lída and Goebbels continued to develop. Meetings at Bogensee became more private. During these visits, the minister organized dinners with few guests and sought any excuse to spend time with the actress. He spoke of cinema, politics, and his plans to turn UFA into a global benchmark. Lída listened, trying not to show rejection, while feeling her life becoming increasingly complicated. At one of these dinners, Goebbels asked her to star in a special project he was promoting. He wanted her to be the main image of a series of films showcasing Germany's greatness. For Lída, the proposal was tempting from a professional standpoint, but she also knew that accepting it would tie her even closer to the minister. UFA directors pressured her to take the role, convinced it would be a great success. Gustav tried to intervene, asking her to avoid these private meetings. However, the minister's power was such that there was no way to refuse without consequences. Filming days became a tense space, with Gustav avoiding the topic and Lída focusing on her work to avoid attracting more rumors. Her co-stars observed the situation with curiosity, knowing something was happening but not daring to comment openly. The atmosphere in Berlin grew increasingly complex. Goebbels, as the Minister of Propaganda, had control over all cultural aspects of the Reich. His ability to decide which films were made and who participated made him a feared and respected figure. Lída, trapped in this environment, began to feel that any misstep could end her career. Even so, the minister's attention was increasingly difficult to avoid. Her relationship with Magda reached a point of extreme tension when the minister's wife confronted Lída directly at a social gathering. Magda, with a firm tone, warned her that her place was in cinema, not in her husband's private life. That warning left Lída in an even more delicate position, forcing her to measure every word and gesture in public. Goebbels' interest did not wane. He continued sending her notes, flowers, and indirect messages through intermediaries. The actress found herself at a crossroads. Continuing her career in Berlin meant living with this constant pressure, while stepping away meant giving up everything she had built in such a short time. The days of tranquility seemed to be a thing of the past, replaced by a tension that grew with each encounter. Hitler intervenes. The Goebbels-Baarová scandal threatens the regime. Magda Goebbels began to notice her husband's growing interest in Lída Baarová during the autumn of 1936. The first signs appeared at parties organized by UFA, where Goebbels paid excessive attention to the Czech actress. Magda, accustomed to handling rumors, realized the situation was crossing a dangerous line. At the Schwanenwerder villa, arguments with Joseph became more frequent and tense. Each time he attended events where Lída was present, their fights grew more intense. Lída, without seeking it, found herself caught between Goebbels' power and his wife's resentment. The actress continued to receive invitations to private dinners and screenings, though she tried to limit her contact with the minister. Gustav Fröhlich, her partner, noticed the change and began showing open signs of jealousy. On set, their relationship deteriorated, and the awkward glances between Gustav and Goebbels became evident to the entire crew. Far from hiding his interest, Goebbels intensified it. He organized a series of gatherings at his Bodensee home, inviting musicians, actors, and directors, but focusing his attention on Lída. Magda decided to attend one of these gatherings to observe the situation closely. Her demeanor was cold and calculated, directing cutting remarks toward the actress. During the dinner, a tense exchange of words made it clear that Magda saw Lída as a direct threat to her marriage. Goebbels' diaries continued to reflect the emotional chaos he experienced during this period. While publicly maintaining the image of an unassailable minister, in private he wrote about the conflicts at home and his fascination with the actress. Peter Longerich notes that this was one of the few times Goebbels showed vulnerability over a personal matter, even recording his frustration over constant arguments with Magda. The Nazi inner circle began to grow concerned. The closeness between the minister and Lída was no longer discreet, and some party members feared it could turn into a scandal. Goebbels represented the regime's discipline and official morality, so an extramarital affair could spark internal criticism. Magda used this situation to pressure Joseph, warning him that his behavior jeopardized his reputation. Lída received hints through ministry intermediaries, suggesting she stay away from Schwanenwerder. However, the minister continued sending her flowers and notes, insisting on seeing her. On one occasion, Magda decided to personally visit the set where Lída was working with Gustav. The arrival of the minister's wife created an awkward silence. She approached Lída with a forced smile, shook her hand, and made a comment that sounded more like a warning than a courtesy. Gustav, aware of the gravity of the situation, tried to speak privately with Lída to convince her to distance herself from Goebbels. Their discussions grew heated, and their once stable relationship began to fracture. The actor knew confronting the minister directly was impossible without consequences for his career. His frustration led him to remain silent in public while privately not hiding his anger. Dinners at Schwanenwerder turned into a silent battlefield. Magda, with her usual elegance, tried to maintain composure but cast glances filled with disdain whenever Lída spoke. Goebbels, in contrast, appeared relaxed and attentive, as if oblivious to the tension in the room. The guests, uncomfortable, tried to steer the conversation towards cinema and music, but it was clear something deeper was at play. The conflict escalated when Magda confronted Joseph directly in front of a few trusted aides. She demanded he end all contact with the actress. Far from yielding, Goebbels defended his friendship with Lída as innocent. This response further enraged Magda, who left the room in tears. Some witnesses recalled this episode as one of the most heated arguments they saw at the villa. At Babelsberg, rumors grew. Technicians whispered about the tension between Gustav and Lída, while directors worried about the impact this could have on productions. For them, the minister's presence on set was both a privilege and a threat. No one wanted to be entangled in a scandal that could jeopardize their work or position within UFA. Despite the pressure, Goebbels continued appearing at locations where Lída worked. On one occasion, he organized a private screening attended by only a few select guests. During the evening, he sat next to the actress and commented on her performance, praising every detail. When Magda learned of this, she organized a gathering at her home where she made it clear she would not tolerate further humiliations. She invited some members of the Nazi circle to expose her husband's behavior. The love triangle became an open secret. Magda's close friends encouraged her to set boundaries, while some of Goebbels' collaborators suggested the situation could become dangerous. The minister, however, seemed unable to resist his attraction to Lída. His diary from those days is filled with notes about domestic arguments and his inability to distance himself from the actress. Lída, caught between loyalty to Gustav and Goebbels' power, began to feel increasingly isolated. UFA producers, fearing trouble, asked her to avoid giving interviews or attending social events without authorization. The pressure from the Nazi environment grew stronger. Some believed her mere presence in Berlin posed a risk to the stability of the propaganda minister's image. In the midst of that storm, Gustav decided to confront Lída one last time. He asked her to leave Berlin and resume her career outside Germany. Lída, however, was at the peak of her success, and abandoning UFA was something she did not want to do. The tension between them became unbearable, and their relationship began to irreparably crumble. The situation involving Magda, Goebbels and Lída became untenable for everyone around them. Every party, every premiere, and every dinner turned into a stage of gestures and silences laden with resentment. The Nazi inner circle watched cautiously, knowing that any leak to the foreign press could unleash a scandal that would damage the regime's image. Hitler decided to act when the scandal between Goebbels and Lída Baarová began to leak beyond UFA's circle. The minister's relationship with the actress had escalated to a dangerous point. At the Schwanenwerder villa, Magda demanded that her husband end the affair, but Joseph, caught between passion and power, went so far as to consider divorce. That idea provoked immediate anger in Hitler. For the Führer, the Goebbels family represented a symbol of unity and loyalty to the regime. A divorce would have been seen as a sign of weakness and would have called into question the image of discipline the party sought to project. The intervention took place in a private meeting. Hitler summoned Goebbels to his office and harshly reprimanded him. He made it clear that his personal life could not become a political problem. The order was direct. He had to end all contact with Lída and reconcile with Magda. Goebbels listened in silence, aware that disobeying would mean losing his position. The minister accepted the imposition, though his diaries from those days hinted at his frustration and sadness. According to historian Peter Longerich's analysis, those notes reveal a man humiliated by having to abandon what he considered a genuine relationship. Lída received news of the breakup through intermediaries. There was no formal goodbye. An assistant of Goebbels appeared at her residence to inform her that the relationship had to end and that, by higher orders, she must leave Berlin. For her, it was a devastating blow. She had invested time and effort into her career in Germany, and now everything was collapsing within hours. With the help of a close friend, she organized her departure to Prague via secondary routes, avoiding any police checkpoints that might hinder her journey. The reconciliation between Goebbels and Magda was forced and calculated. Hitler orchestrated a public event to project an image of family harmony. Carefully planned photographs showed the Führer posing with the Goebbels family and their children in a gesture of unity. Propaganda used these images to convey the idea of an exemplary family, while the true situation in Schwanenwerder remained tense. Magda accepted the reconciliation only for appearances, but she never forgave her husband for the public humiliation. For Lída, the consequences were immediate. The Ministry of Propaganda ordered UFA to terminate her contract. She was banned from acting in Germany and warned not to appear in any media associated with the Reich. Helldorf, the Berlin police chief, was personally sent to inform her that her career in German cinema was over. That visit was a clear message that the regime would not allow a foreign actress to remain at the center of a scandal affecting one of its most powerful ministers. The Third Reich's image policy was relentless. Hitler understood cinema as a tool for social control, and Goebbels was its chief architect. Any personal situation that could tarnish the reputation of that machinery had to be eliminated without hesitation. Lída, despite not having sought that role, became a problem to be resolved. German media were instructed not to mention her name and to erase her image from any posters or advertisements. Goebbels was trapped in an internal conflict. In public, he maintained composure and delivered propagandistic speeches, but in private, his mood was somber. His diaries reflect the sense of defeat caused by losing Lída. He wrote phrases that revealed his unease, such as, "The duty of the state comes before personal desires." Those words were an acceptance that his life was entirely subordinate to Hitler's will. From Prague, Lída tried to rebuild her career. The first few months were difficult. Despite her talent, the weight of the scandal followed her everywhere. Some local producers viewed her with suspicion, fearing reprisals from the Nazi regime. She considered traveling to the United States, where she had received offers to do screen tests in Hollywood, but the political climate and the onset of international tensions complicated those plans. Her years in Berlin, which had been her time of greatest success, became a shadow that haunted her. The Nazi establishment capitalized on the situation to reinforce its narrative of internal discipline. Hitler, satisfied with having averted a larger scandal, used the case as an example for other high-ranking officials. He made it clear that no one was above the regime, not even the Minister of Propaganda. Goebbels understood the message and redoubled his efforts in the ministry. He focused on producing high-impact films as a way to compensate for the personal humiliation he had endured. In the months that followed, Goebbels barely mentioned Lída in his notes. The few references to her were melancholic, recalling moments he could not relive. His collaborators noticed a change in his demeanor, with episodes of irritation and prolonged silence. Magda, for her part, regained some of her standing in the household, but her relationship with Joseph was never the same. The marriage endured out of political convenience rather than affection. Lída tried to remain active in Czechoslovakia. She filmed a few movies in Prague and later in Italy, but her name remained tied to Goebbels. Every interview or public appearance sparked uncomfortable questions about her time in Berlin. The actress chose to steer clear of politics and focus on her work, though the emotional aftermath of that breakup lingered. The emotional impact on both was profound. For Goebbels, Lída had been more than an affair. He had found in her something absent in his marriage to Magda: genuine admiration and a personal connection outside the political sphere. Hitler's order forced him to sever that bond, leaving a wound that never healed. For Lída, that affair marked the beginning of a period of distrust toward the film industry and power, an experience that haunted her in every interview and became the central theme of her public life. The breakup also affected the regime's perception of foreign actresses. After the incident, Goebbels became more cautious in dealing with non-German artists. Lída's case served as a warning to others. No one could challenge the party's established rules, even unintentionally. Berlin's film circles grew more rigid, with constant surveillance of stars' private lives. The relationship between Hitler and Goebbels was also strained by the incident. Though the minister complied with the order to end the romance, personal tensions were evident. Hitler reminded him on more than one occasion that his position depended on absolute loyalty to the party and its leader. This warning reinforced Hitler's image as the supreme authority in both the private and public lives of his collaborators. Trials without a court, the public condemnation of Lída Baarová. Lída Baarová left Berlin when political pressure became unbearable. After Hitler's intervention, the actress decided to return to Prague. She bid a silent farewell to the German capital with no premieres or public goodbyes. Her time at UFA had ended abruptly. In Czechoslovakia, she sought to resume her career, but the outbreak of the war and the German occupation complicated her plans. The fame she had gained in Berlin followed her like a shadow. Local producers feared associating with her due to her past with Goebbels. With the fall of the Third Reich in 1945, Lída became a target of investigations by the Allies. She was arrested by American forces and handed over to Czech authorities. Her name appeared in reports as the Mistress of the Propaganda Minister, a label that would haunt her for years. During interrogations, she was repeatedly questioned about her relationship with Goebbels and any possible ties to the Nazi regime. The actress denied any political involvement, but her story with Joseph was enough to keep her under scrutiny. The international press amplified Lída's image as a figure entangled in the Nazi inner circle. European newspapers published articles portraying her as a seductive woman who had influenced one of the regime's most powerful men. These publications further damaged her reputation, turning her name into a synonym for scandal. In Prague, the situation was no different. She was met with distrust and at times hostility from the public, who saw her as someone too close to the enemy. In the months following the war's end, Lída remained detained under harsh conditions. According to her later statements, the interrogations were exhaustive, focusing on her meetings with Goebbels and any secrets she might know about the Nazi elite. She insisted that her relationship had been personal with no political connection. The investigators sought any information that could be used in the Nuremberg trials, but they found no evidence linking her to war crimes. The actress was released after months of detention, though her life would never be the same. Returning to cinema was challenging. Many producers in Czechoslovakia refused to hire her. She decided to move to Italy, where she found better opportunities to film. In Rome, she worked with local directors who valued her talent and international experience, though the shadow of her Berlin past continued to surface in interviews and reports. Peter Longerich points out that the post-war years were a period of forced reinvention for Lída. Her career, which had reached its peak in Nazi Germany, was reduced to minor roles in European productions. Goebbels' name continued to appear in every article about her, forcing her to avoid the media and maintain a low profile. In interviews given years later, she admitted that her connection to the minister had been a burden that followed her throughout her professional life. Despite attempts to rehabilitate her image, the press did not forget her story. German and French magazines published photographs from her UFA days, accompanied by headlines labeling her as Goebbels' Forbidden Muse. These articles prevented Lída from achieving a true renaissance in European cinema. However, she found some support in the Italian film industry, where she worked on several films in the 1950s. Life in exile was not easy. Lída lived in various cities, including Rome, Vienna and Salzburg, always trying to escape the image imposed on her by Nazi propaganda. Although she managed to work in some moderately successful productions, she never regained the fame she had in the 1930s. The wounds of the past remained open, both due to the interrogations she endured and the way public opinion viewed her. Over time, Lída began giving interviews in which she shared her version of events. Without embellishments or justifications, she described how she had been swept up by circumstances in a period when politics and cinema were closely intertwined. In her testimonies, she recalled the terror she felt during her arrest and the psychological impact of the interrogations. She described that period as one of the darkest moments of her life, where her status as an actress was overshadowed by the stigma of her proximity to Goebbels. Longerich's book confirms that her relationship with the minister placed her in a vulnerable position. Although she had no direct involvement in the regime's activities, her closeness to Nazi power was enough for the Allies to investigate her as a potential collaborator. American and British intelligence reports mentioned her as a person to be monitored, though she was ultimately cleared of political responsibility. In Italy, Lída managed to rebuild part of her career, but always with the sense of being under the critical gaze of the press. She acted in dramas and comedies, trying to distance herself from the femme fatale image UFA had given her. Despite her efforts, journalists continued to ask about Goebbels, turning every press conference into a painful revisit of her past. This led her to avoid interviews as much as possible and focus on her work in front of the camera. During the 1960s and 1970s, Lída lived between Austria and Germany, taking part in minor film projects and occasional television appearances. In her memoirs, she detailed the impact of the post-war years, the rejection from some colleagues, and the loneliness of those years. Although she never considered herself guilty of what had happened, she understood that her story was tied to one of Europe's darkest chapters. In the 1990s, Lída Baarová began giving public talks that became her most direct legacy regarding her relationship with Joseph Goebbels. In these encounters, she spoke clearly, without dramatization or embellishment, focusing on the facts. She recounted how she met the minister in 1936 and how their relationship evolved from social encounters to an intimacy she had never anticipated. She clarified that she never sought power or privileges and that her story with Goebbels was a mix of personal attraction and pressure from the political environment. During these confessions, she vividly recalled her time at the UFA studios. She described how Goebbels invited her to private meetings at his country house and how those visits went unnoticed by the public but not by the Nazi elite. She noted that the minister was charming and persuasive, with a charisma that helped him get what he wanted. Lída insisted she was not in love with him, though she admitted to enjoying the attention of a man with such influence. One of the central points of her accounts was the triangle with Magda Goebbels. Lída described the tensions with the minister's wife, the uncomfortable visits, and the direct conversation in which Magda asked her to end everything. She also recounted the moment when Hitler intervened, an episode that defined her definitive departure from Berlin. She explained that the Führer considered the private lives of his ministers an extension of the regime's propaganda, and thus did not tolerate the scandal. In these testimonies, Lída offered no political judgments. She limited herself to describing how the regime viewed her as a threat to Goebbels' image. She spoke of the messages she received to leave Germany, and how her UFA contract was cancelled by direct orders from the ministry. These claims aligned with passages in Peter Longerich's book, which mentions the Nazi authorities' intervention to protect the propaganda minister's image. Baarová spoke of the war's impact on her life. She recalled how after returning to Czechoslovakia, her name remained tied to the Nazi minister, leading to her arrest at the end of the conflict. The subsequent interrogations were harsh, focusing on her connection to Goebbels. In the 1990s, as she revisited these memories, she recounted with cold clarity the fear she felt when accused of collaborating with the regime, though she was ultimately not charged with any crimes. The testimonies from that period revealed details about the intimacy of the Nazi inner circle. Lída recounted how, at the parties organized by UFA, it was common to see regime figures mingling with artists, and how Goebbels controlled every aspect of the film industry. She described an environment in which cinema served both to entertain and to reinforce the party's ideology. As a foreign actress, she found herself in a fragile position, caught between the admiration she inspired and the constant surveillance of the regime. In those memoirs, she spoke of her career in Italy after the war. She recounted how, despite filming new movies, her past continued to haunt her. Journalists often asked her about Goebbels more than about her work. For Lída, this was a burden she accepted as an inevitable consequence of her history. Toward the end of her life, Lída moved to Austria, where she lived in relative anonymity. In the accounts she gave during those years, she recalled personal episodes in detail, but without any intention of justifying anything. She spoke of Goebbels as a complex man, with a mix of charm and brutality, but without offering opinions or judgments about his role in the Nazi regime. She focused on concrete facts, their meetings, shared trips, conversations, and the impact those experiences had on her career. Peter Longerich, in his biography of Goebbels, analyzes the minister's diaries and confirms several of the episodes narrated by Lída. The author notes that the diary entries reflect Goebbels' obsession with the actress and how this relationship became a political problem. Lída's testimonies complement this perspective, providing an outsider's view of how the Nazi power circle functioned. Lída spoke openly about the last time she saw Goebbels, when she received the order to leave Berlin. She recounted that he expressed affection and bid her farewell with words she still remembered in the 1990s. These words, recorded in documentaries and programs, became the primary source for reconstructing that part of her story. In her final years, Lída recalled her family, her first steps in Czech cinema, and how politics ruined her career in Germany. She insisted that she had no interest in Nazi ideology and that her relationship with Goebbels was personal, not political. She repeated this point several times to make it clear that her career and life were swept away by circumstances. In her last appearances, she acknowledged that her connection with Goebbels destroyed her life. She stated that her existence had become a hell, and that every attempt to rebuild her career was marked by that history. She confessed that she rejected offers from Hollywood, something she regretted for years, convinced that her destiny could have been as great as Marlene Dietrich's. She also recounted that even decades later, society did not forgive her past. In 1967, while performing at a theatre in Graz, a group of protesters threw eggs at her in rejection. In 1995, a biographical film reopened old wounds, placing her once again at the center of public scrutiny. Lída then spoke with a harsher tone about her youth, describing herself as a naive woman without political awareness and afraid to confront the regime's power. Regarding Nazi crimes, she declared herself indifferent, a statement that sparked criticism in Austria and Germany. Among her confessions, she acknowledged that she could never escape the weight of having shared 2 years of her life with the propaganda minister. Lída passed away in Salzburg on the 27th of October in the year 2000 at the age of 86. Her remains were taken to Prague, fulfilling her wish to rest alongside her family. In her final months, she remained silent about her past, though her earlier interviews had already left a clear record of her story. Lída Baarová's story shows how fame, power, and politics can intertwine to destroy a life. Her confessions, historical documents, and the testimonies she left at the end of her days allow us to understand the price she paid for being close to one of the most influential men of the Third Reich. Every detail of her account reveals a past marked by decisions beyond her control and a regime that dominated everything.